How did you view the nuclear disarmament spring and Obama's Prague speech?
I thought it was cosmetic flannel, to be quite blunt. I thought Obama's speech was a great moment of inspiration, but it has followed through to nothing. He is now investing more money in nuclear weapons, obstructing any serious negotiations about abolition. What all those top people you're talking about, and they are top people, what they're talking about is us having nuclear weapons at a lower level, and none of the others out there, the unwashed, as it were, of the rest of the world, they're not having nuclear weapons. I don't know a single senior politician of the nuclear-armed countries who is serious about abolishing nuclear weapons. I don't know one. In this country, in Britain, where I am now, we're talking about making sure we have them at a cost of £100 billion for another 35 years. Americans are renewing theirs, the French are renewing theirs, the Chinese are renewing theirs, though they've never had very many. Probably the same with the North Koreans, the Pakistanis and the Indians. But nuclear abolition has never been seriously negotiated, even though it's an obligation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and an obligation of the International Court of Justice, but never negotiated. So I think these people are, I don't be too horrible about them, but they realise that it's good housekeeping. What's the point of having 60,000 nuclear weapons when you could do the same job with 5,000? And that's what it comes down to. So I'm afraid I'm quite cynical about that. The impetus to nuclear disarmament does not come from the nuclear powers. It's come from outside the nuclear powers. New Zealand has been a classic case. South Africa, which abandoned its nuclear program. These are the places where, from the churches, I mean, I think that it gets little recognition, but I must say in my church, the Catholic Church, both the present Pope, Francis, and his predecessor have been clear as a bell. The Catholic hierarchy in this country called in '06 for the decommissioning of all nuclear weapons. Decommissioning, out. But never got any attention at all. So I think we still live in a world where they believe in nuclear deterrence, but we're going to be the ones who are going to do the deterring. That's what they come down to. Sorry, I sound horrible, but that's what I think.
If you were asked to give advice to the top level group, the political people who are trying to put forward this agenda, could you just say, in a nutshell, sort of...
You missed out one word in this. They always talk like that, but there's one word you missed out.
Yeah.
It's always eventual. Oh, yes, we want to do this and that, the other, for eventual nuclear disarmament.
Yes.
A very significant word.
Yes,
it means sometime the
very
next second coming.
Yes.
That's what eventual means in that particular concept. What would I say? I'd say you at the United Nations, you have got a 120-page draft treaty on the elimination of nuclear weapons. It's been with you for 15 years. It's similar to the one that abolishes chemical weapons. This treaty has been with you in draft. You have never sat down to discuss its terms. Sit down, call an international meeting in London and begin to negotiate the abolition of nuclear weapons. And the first thing is to count who's got how many and where they are, take the warheads away so that the things are rendered inert, take the things off immediate firing capability, begin to defuse things, begin to make it an international crime to work on weapons of mass destruction. For scientists will be brought in, start to acknowledge that you have to allow instant inspection. That the treaty, for instance, says that if some country suspects some other country, there has to be a UN body who has the ability to say, within 2 weeks, we want to come with an independent body and look at what you're doing in this factory. Fine. We do it with chemical weapons. We do it with heroin, actually. Why shouldn't we do it with nuclear weapons? Those are the nuts and bolts of nuclear disarmament. And the ultimate aim is getting rid of them, making sure that they all go. And it's perfectly possible. There's no religion that stops you doing it. But they've never done that. They talk about intermediate steps. We won't test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. Well, good for you. That's an excellent thing not to test them in the atmosphere. I want for that. We won't have so many. Well, good for you. It's much cheaper to have fewer. We won't have so many on the first launch like the European cruise missiles. Good for you. All set. But these are only good housekeeping. They're not aimed at the abolition of nuclear weapons. And that's what this treaty is, and that's what they will not sit down and talk about.
Why do you think they won't do anything about it? Why they're not looking at this document?
They won't discuss it because there is a deep down religion, which they've had since 1945, that nuclear weapons are the answer to anybody's aggressive tendencies. We have nuclear weapons and they give us safety. And we've had that into our heads in propaganda non-stop ever since 1945. They're the ultimate security shield, blah, blah. In fact, we call it the deterrent, which is an argument in itself. Well, who does it deter? Doesn't deter terrorists, doesn't deter accidents. Who did it deter? The Soviet Union? Did the Soviet Union, having lost 20 million people in the Second World War, really intend to occupy France? You know, it's all built on a kind of rhetoric which has been we've been swamped with. So it's a deep down. We're big powers. That's the other side of it. We're big powers, and so we have to have the big weapon. I remember very well reading in Peter Hennessy's book about Ernest Bevin, who came to this meeting in 1947 when Attlee was actually against nuclear weapons. And Ernest Bevin said, I want them over here. I don't care what they cost. I want them with a bloody great Union Jack on top. And that, I think, is the fundamental. They give us peace and we're British, so we're going to have them. And it's deep down in people's mind of that generation. Not of, I think, 18-year-olds or 25-year-olds. They'd sooner have a decent National Health Service. But for a lot of the older voters, it's part of their tribal makeup.
Who are the leading lights in this work and the global leaders, the spiritual leaders?
Well, I'm not much of a global person, but if you want global ones, I'd say Archbishop Tutu is a global one. I think he's marvellous, and he's got a sense of humour, which is fantastic. I remember him saying about the ANC, they just stopped the gravy train long enough to get on it, get on board. I thought that was really wonderful, critical of his own people. So Tutu, I think the present Pope Francis has got a touch that I don't know who else has got around the place. He's long since dead, but if you remember a book called African Socialism by Julius Nyerere, President of Tanzania, fantastic book for politics and ethics all tied together. I think Gorbachev actually too. Gorbachev deserves something from all of us because he had the good sense to say, well, this is ridiculous. And I remember he, in response to the things we were saying, he said, I'm going to unilaterally, it's a dangerous word, unilaterally, you're going to stop nuclear testing for 18 months. And he did. And I don't think anything changed the Thatcher world more than the fact that he could do something like that. Suddenly he didn't look like an aggressive monster anymore, which is what he was meant to be, to fit in with their kind of view of things. So Gorbachev, I think, was very good. But in the past, there were lots of people, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King, heavens above. And especially in my world here, Joseph Rotblat, who I think I mentioned once, he's the only scientist I know, the only one, who refused in 1944 to work on the bomb. Some of them went on with the bomb. They all made fusses about it, even Einstein, well, it might be bad consequences and so on. But they went on with the work. But Rotblat, as far as I know, is the only one who said, I will not do this now that I know what it's going to be used for. That's very brave. And he was in disgrace, called him a communist, took his papers away from him, sent him home to nothing to no job and so on. Very brave. The Jewish refugee he was. When he got his Nobel Prize, he made a speech in which he said, the time has gone for us to be opposed to individual weapons. He didn't mean don't oppose them, but you've now got to talk about a world without war. And that's what we're trying to do in the movement of the abolition of war. I mean, I don't mean to say he was approving of individual weapons. He wasn't. But he was saying that campaigns have got to have a wider focus to eliminate war itself. No, he was right.